Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed, Q&A, part 3. We are ready to get into it. Are you ready, Tim?
I am ready. I've been answering a lot of questions so far. There's more to get into. I'm keen. But before we do...
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th Gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th Gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, next question here. Do you think Nvidia was successful in blocking 16GB 4060 Ti reviews by not sampling media?
Well, no, because you made a review.
Well, they weren't successful in stopping me.
I think outside of Hardware Unboxed, I didn't see too many other reviews or actually anyone having them at all. Like, isn't it? You can't even buy them in some countries by the looks of it.
I have heard that, yes. They're obviously available in Australia because I did buy one at retail. We weren't able to get one behind the scenes or ahead of time, so that was a bit frustrating. But I don't think the driver was available anyway until the release day.
Yep.
So that probably would have stopped me in my tracks. So no, I just went into a store. I actually sent our video editor, Balin, down to PC Case Gear, and he went and bought one on release day. So thank you, Balin, for your sacrifice. I was busy doing a bit of other testing to finish up some other content. But we bought one. We did review it, or reviewed it. And we'll obviously use it for upcoming benchmarks and things like that as well. So it's from a sort of foresight, scientific type standpoint, it's a very interesting product. So I'm glad that we have it. But yeah, as you say, I haven't really looked around, but I haven't noticed too many other reviews. Well, I haven't actually, I don't think I've read or watched another review yet.
No, it's very, very limited coverage, especially because I think you got your review done pretty quickly.
Yeah, 2 days without sleep, basically.
So yeah, obviously if other people are buying it then, and the drive's not available, it limits the amount of time you've got on it. But yeah, I mean, obviously this is sort of a success in terms of if Nvidia doesn't want a lot of reviews or coverage, then it's clear that a lot of reviewers do rely on samples. We even rely on samples to some degree. We'd rather not buy every single thing.
But we will.
We will if we have to.
We will.
Would obviously be a big hit. But yeah, I mean, it's not like we're blaming reviewers for not going and buying one. Like, fair enough. You don't want to spend that amount of money on that product.
Yeah, and it's no mystery as to what it is.
Exactly.
So it's the same product, just with twice the VRAM buffer, which for a lot of reviewers, and us included, doesn't change the results from your standard benchmark suite all that much because you're generally not testing heavily VRAM limited scenarios because you're actually trying to test scenarios that work pretty well with the cards you're testing. And we're not claiming that, you know, you're going to play a Plague Tale Requiem at 1080p using the ultra quality settings with ray tracing enabled, though you can with the 16GB model, but we're not saying that's necessarily how people would play it. But we're trying to sort of give you some insight into how the products that you're purchasing now may age, you know, how future-proof those products are. That's something we try to set out to do. So yeah, but again, for a lot of reviewers, it's probably just going to be like, well, this is a dumb product. It's like, yeah, of course. Twice as much VRAM's good. That's what you want, but you don't want to pay $100 for it. So the conclusion I gave is sort of a self-evident conclusion that all other reviewers will have drawn without actually buying the product. So you don't really need the product to come to the correct conclusion, I suppose. So there's also that. And everyone's, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of over the RTX 4060 Ti. Like, everyone said their bit. It sucks. Like, it's a crap product at $400. $500 isn't going to make it better no matter how much VRAM it has. So it's a pretty garbage product, pretty unexciting, and
it's not a whole lot to say on it, really.
No.
Like, people just in general about the GPU market at the moment, not like, you know, going crazy over it, saying it's awesome and it needs to be tested. A lot of people are very sort of burnt out.
Yeah, that's right.
So
if the 4060 Ti at $400, that gigabyte version was an amazing product, it was awesome. Like, you know, if it had been priced at $250, let's say, then everyone would be all excited about it. And a 16 gigabyte version for a bit of a premium, even if it's quite a premium, that would also be an exciting, awesome product. So people would be scrambling to get one, test it out, and be like, yeah, no, this is the one you should get. This is more future-proof. It's going to handle upcoming games better with those high-resolution textures, yada, yada, yada. But it just, yeah, it's a crap product that's a little less crap technically, but also more crap realistically. So,
yeah.
All right, Tim, here's a fun little one we can give our opinion on. Would you say that this GPU generation, so Ada Lovelace, is worse than Turing?
Oh, boy. I guess the fact that I can't immediately answer this question tells you that it's a hard question to answer. I think the issue with Turing that probably made it probably worse than Ada would be that a lot of the cards just had no performance improvement at the same price tier, whereas at least with Ada, some GPUs did have a performance uplift at the same price or the same value.
Yeah,
but it's sort of like that we weren't getting enough.
I think some of them were better though with Turing. Better.
The 2080 Ti was probably
I think there was
better.
a few.
The 2060 was pretty good.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I can't remember now. I think there was some that were off the top of my head. If I had to say, I think that Ada Lovelace is a worse generation. So
yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we have to go back there and you
have to really dig in and do a top to bottom analysis. But
a lot of the Turing marketing was around ray tracing and DLSS, which were very incomplete features when they were announced, and that was sort of the whole selling point of the card. And I think at least with Ada, while DLSS 3 isn't as impressive of a feature as DLSS 2, in my opinion, at least it was usable. Whereas when Turing launched, like the main selling points, there weren't even games with those features in it. And then you did get those features and they weren't very good for many years. So I guess from the feature standpoint, I think Ada is a far superior generation in terms of what they're selling you on features and what they're delivering is much closer.
Sure.
But then Ada, I would agree that there's some Turing products I think were much more attractive at some price points.
We'll have to, maybe we can add something to this video, but I have it'd be interesting to look at the cost per frame because I have a feeling that Turing may end up being better value, despite the fact that those features they were selling you on, which is the point we made at the time, and NVIDIA fans, let's say, weren't too rapt that we were saying that the first iteration of DLSS was crap because it was. They got very upset when you said DLSS 1's dead or something like that, which it was. And ray tracing support was virtually non-existent, and the games that did support it were laughably bad. So that is all true. The feature set was very immature and poorly executed, but obviously, and that's fine. You got to start somewhere, which that wasn't our gripe. Our gripe was those features were used specifically to sell that generation and they sucked. So anyway.
Well, I think as well with Ada, like a 4090 versus 3090 was a much larger performance increase than the 1080 Ti to the 2080 Ti. And the 2080 Ti was also priced a lot higher, whereas the 3090 to 4090 was a similar price.
I think the flagship was less impressive for sure.
But I think the lower end of Turing was better.
Yeah, I think the mid-range to lower end of Turing was better.
And they also had the GTX 16 series, which I know wasn't Turing, but some of those models were reasonable in that sort of $150 to $250 range. The 1650 wasn't great.
No, the 1650 Super was okay.
The 1660 series was okay, like certainly better than what we're getting now. And they didn't have like a huge fail like a 4060 to 8GB. There wasn't really that in the Turing generation.
No, well, there was no card that was slower than the previous generation.
Like the 2080,
they were as fast or faster with newer features and other improvements. So
I don't think it's a definitive one way or the other. There's certainly, you can make an argument either way, but
yeah, I think it depends on, like I said, the models we're comparing.
Yeah, certainly no Ampere, that's for sure.
All right, Tim, do you think BattleMage has had a chance to be really disruptive considering the massive improvements Intel has made with Alchemist?
I mean, I'd probably be more optimistic now than I was before we'd seen Arc GPUs at all. Intel's certainly put in a long and sustained effort into improving their products. It's not like they've just released it and gone, okay, that's that. They are putting in the effort to improve the drivers, improve performance. XeSS has proven to be quite a good feature for their GPUs as well. Obviously, game support could be improved, but they're not giving up on that either by the sounds of things. So yeah, from those standpoints, I think they definitely have an opportunity. I think where they're going to struggle is having the performance to compete at the high end. Obviously, the Alchemist GPUs today are not high-end products. They're very much entry-level, mainstream type GPUs, which is why they're priced where they're priced. So if we're going to, it's unlikely we're going to see like a 5090 competitor from Intel going from the A770 now to that level of performance. Pretty unlikely. But if they continue to be aggressive on pricing, as we've talked about, the issue with a lot of the GPU market at the moment are those mainstream entry-level price to performance ratios, the lack of improvement over the years in terms of value in that area. And Intel definitely has an opportunity, if they can get their other things in order, to do something in that space and at least put some competition into Nvidia and AMD, who are sort of just sitting around going, okay, the status quo is okay. If Intel comes out with a really competitively priced product, it could definitely be successful for them. And then over time, they can work on those higher and higher tiers as their GPU lineup improves. So, yeah, I'm sort of optimistic. I think it's gone. I don't know if better than expected is how I'd put it, but
I think it's progressed better than expected.
Yeah, yes.
I think if they had have launched Arc in the condition it is today originally, it would have been much better received.
Yes.
Much better received, really. So, yeah, I think they've made some good progress. So, yeah, I think their second go-around will be much more successful than the first go at it.
Yep. Another Intel Arc question here. Would you now recommend more gamers try Arc GPUs given the state of current-gen AMD and Nvidia cards? Maybe it will encourage Intel to put more resources in that division. I think with the pricing that they're at the moment, it's...
Yeah, they're fairly compelling.
Yeah.
I've got to do some more updated testing. A few people have complained that we haven't got Arc GPUs in our current benchmark graphs for stuff like the RTX 4060 and RX 7600. And the reason for that is we were sort of under a bit of a time crunch there, and I went to update our Arc results and I ran into a few different problems in a couple of the games we were testing. So I think Intel has addressed all of those problems now, so I'll probably have a go at doing that again. Would I recommend... It's a tough one. I mean, I'm not exactly sure where I stand on the Arc GPUs because they're certainly impressive in certain games. And I know other games there's ongoing issues, which has been frustrating for those of you who own Arc GPUs. So if you happen to play a game that is well supported and works well, then sure, seems like a good idea. But yeah, and I mean, Intel has been committed to Arc, and when there have been problems, they've done their best to jump on them and address them. But yeah, I don't know if I'm ready to recommend them over similarly priced, AMD products, because I think the 6650 XT is within like $10 of the Arc A750.
I think when was it the A750 or A770? I can't quite remember. One of them dropped to below $200, and I think that is reasonably compelling given what it offers. But certainly it's going to, as you say, take that. It needs to be that level lower price.
Yeah, like AMD needs to be a level below Nvidia,
yeah,
and then Intel needs to be a level below AMD.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I would see it. Certainly they need to be offering very compelling price to performance to sort of mitigate some of the other issues. But again, those issues are improving. So as you say, if you find a game that works really well for you and you're sort of committed to playing that game, I imagine it'll be a little bit better with newer titles over time, as I imagine a lot of Intel's driver development effort will be on newer games as opposed to older games. If that's sort of the position that you're in, then yeah, it could be a decent option. And again, there's not a lot of like sub $200 cards that are like, go out and buy that. I think the RX 6600 has just started dipping below $200 US. So there's certainly an opportunity for a higher performance Intel GPU to offer something there. It's just a matter of Intel getting the price down that low. I think the current pricing for like an A770 is still a little too high, especially for the 16 gig model. I mean, if the 16 gig model is like $200, it's like there's some reasonable, looks reasonably good there. So yeah, it's all about pricing for Intel, and they're clearly still working on that. So yeah, we'll see.
I reckon you might have a few things to say on this one, but I'll read it out because you've said a few things to me over the last little bit. So the question is, Nvidia must have launched the 4060 Ti 16GB, assuming that it would in one way or another be well received, but then started to second guess themselves after the 4060 and Ti 8GB reviews. So what do you think their initial angle was?
It's a confusing one. this launch for this series hasn't made a whole lot of sense. So it's hard to sort of, piece together exactly what NVIDIA was thinking with the 8 gig model and the 16 gig model. So here's sort of my best guess, and this is not based on inside information or speaking to NVIDIA at all. This is just pure my guess and speculation. But it seems like the original plan was always to have the 8 gig model as the primary 4060 Ti variant. It's the model that came out first. It had the most marketing. It was talked about and packaged the most, and we got a FE model for that card. There's none for the 16 gig card. Just sort of things adding up where sort of it seemed like they'd planned for the 8 gig model. And then at some point, it seems like they'd realized that in that price tier and the trend where games were going, that an 8 gig card was probably not going to be sufficient. So at some point during the development cycle, they've gone, well, we need to come up with a higher capacity model of this card. And again, like a 4060 Ti 8 gig was probably been planned for 2 years ago. Is probably when they were deciding on die sizes and specifications and things. So, there's a long development cycle for those things. And then so they've come up with this 16 gig model, but then they've gone, well, if we push this too hard, then it kind of embarrasses the 8 gig card. So they're kind of juggling these things where they know the 16 gig card is really the card that makes the most sense, but they can't just completely destroy the 8 gig card in terms of, like, they want 8 gig cards to sell because they've already made a whole bunch of them.
And that's where they've got big margins on them.
Yeah, so they can't, for example, make the 8 gig model $400 and the 16 gig model $420.
No.
Because everyone would buy the 16 gig card and they'd be left with all these 8 gig models. And they don't want to have a situation where reviewers destroy the 8 gig card, then say the 16 gig card is a must buy. So they're kind of juggling all these different things. And it seems like I would be surprised if there was further restocks of the 8 gig card. I think that card will slowly fade away and the 16 gig card will become the dominant card, potentially at a lower price over time. But it's an interesting thing to think about because it doesn't make heaps of sense.
No, it's a Band-Aid solution, but it's one that needed to happen. But we didn't want to pay $100 premium for it. So what you're saying seems plausible to me. We have no idea what they will do, but
it doesn't really explain the price, though. The price could still have been better. Well,
it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next year, what they end up doing there, because the 16 gig model really is a must, but you just absolutely wouldn't buy it for $500. Even $400, it's not exactly like, wow, this is amazing, but it's a hell of a lot better.
I mean, the card should have been the 16 gig model at $400.
Definitely.
So the question is, like, if the development was too late on the 16 gig card and they'd already started producing the 8 gig card, then obviously they'd have to push those out the door as opposed to just fully switching over to the 16 gig. But again, we'll probably never know. But I mean, a lot of their marketing and pre-briefings and stuff were very odd for NVIDIA, sort of not really being able to explain why you should buy the 8 gig model and the 16 gig model. It was the reason why you'd buy one was contradictory to the other one. Like they would say,
yeah, it didn't make any sense.
The 8 gig is enough for modern gaming. You should buy the 8 gig card. And then on the other hand, they're saying, well, you should spend $100 more on the 16 gig card because it has benefits in some games. Both those things can't be true at the same time. It's either 8 gig is or isn't sufficient for that price and that sort of performance tier. So again, it was very odd. And clearly there's been some internal things going on there as to why we've got those two models.
Yeah, a way they could have marketed it, but again, the pricing structure would have to be different and their margins would be a lot lower than they are, which they're obviously not going to love. But 16 gigabyte model for $400, which really probably should be the only model.
Yeah.
But if you want to offer a $350 model that's not much cheaper, and you're kind of like, why does that exist? They could make that as sort of the esports model. People who don't want to spend the full $400 can get half the VRAM because they don't need 16 gigabytes. But then there'll probably be like an Apex Legends released in the future. Anyway,
I mean, there's another angle as well, which is that the 4060 and the 4060 Ti use different dies, right?
Yeah.
They use the 107 for the 4060, the 106 for the 4060 Ti. So theoretically, if they had this 8 gig card come out, they could have maybe disabled a few cores as well as making it the 8 gig card and sold that as a 4060, which would then leave the 107 die for a 4050 type product. That would have made a lot more sense. So you'd have sort of, as you say, like maybe $350 or a bit less for this 4060 8 gig model, then you'd go straight to 16 gig 4060 Ti.
Which we're not advocating though for them to keep the product name the same and change the core configuration, just to be clear.
No, I'm saying it would be a 4060, not a TI, non-TI.
Yeah, okay. So
4060 with 8 gig, few cut down cores, and then what is the 4060 today becomes the 4050, which I think would have made the lineup look a lot more attractive. It would have justified, the lower memory bus, the 8 gig capacity, which is still a downgrade on the 3060, so it's still a little bit dicey there, but I think people would have been much happier if that was sort of the configuration. But again, NVIDIA's gone with what they're going for because they think they can sell that card. And I think they've been proven wrong. We'll see what happens in the next couple of months, how happy they are. But yeah, doesn't look like a great success at the moment.
Considering those with a GTX 1080 Ti are still doing well today, how much should someone consider the longevity of a part's competitiveness in future games and workloads in their purchasing decision? Yeah, I mean, personally, I place quite a bit of emphasis on that, which is why, again, like when we test things like 8GB versus 16GB, we test games that are available today under conditions that you may not necessarily play them in, just to see what happens when you put more load on the GPU, load up the memory, maybe overwhelm the memory subsystem, stuff like that, and what sort of differences we're seeing there, because that can give you a pretty good indication of what future more demanding games may be doing. Like, I know people are gobsmacked when they learn that games are going to start using more than 8GB of VRAM. They seem to think that gaming just teleported to 8GB of usage and will never go beyond that. I'm not sure what the thinking is there, but games will always use more of the CPU, more memory, more GPU. That's what's always happened with gaming. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that in a few years from now, games will be reliably using well over 8GB of VRAM for high quality and ultra quality and maybe even medium quality settings. That's just where things will eventually head. Once upon a time, we had less than 1 gig, then we had 1 gig, 2 gig, 4 gig, and that's how it's gone. So, yeah, but again, I mean, I think I've said it already. I would buy the 16GB version of the 4060 Ti if I had to buy a 4060 Ti. If I was unfortunate enough to be in a position where that was the only thing I had available to me, I would spend the $100 US premium, which seems a bit silly, to get the double the VRAM, because I'm fully expecting that will pay off within the feasible life cycle of that product. And we've seen it with parts like the GTX 1080 Ti. One of the reasons why that part runs so well, you can just flick quality settings to higher ultra and it works because it's got 11GB of VRAM. So it's covered there. It's got more than an RTX 3080. So pretty good product.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just have to look at how often you upgrade your GPUs, and you're sort of thinking about, well, if I upgrade every 4 years, then I should be interested in the longevity of the card for 4 years. Well, that tends to be like how I think about most purchasing decisions. Like,
Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was going to say, who's upgrading their RTX 3070 for frame generation or more VRAM?
I think most people are making the VRAM decision at the moment.
I think so.
So yeah, that's just sort of the way I've always gone about it. Obviously, it's a little hard to predict some of these things. I think even we were surprised at how quickly VRAM became an issue, which is why it's sort of more of a minor thing that we talked about in the reviews. I guess talked about more than some other people, but yeah, so these things can come up quickly, but again, I think the way that you test with sort of looking at those edge cases, while it may not be representative of today, is trying to give people a look into the future, as well as the classic thing of testing CPUs at 1080p and those things, which a lot of people are not going to be playing with the 4090 at 1080p, but it sort of is designed to look into where's the stress is going to be. If games become more CPU limited, then that gives you the best indication. And certainly with the CPU, I'd be wanting it to last for as many years as possible. That's
right. If you have multiple different products available at the same price point, you want to kind of know which one you should be buying. And the best way to work that out is to test which one is actually faster, which one actually has more resources, which one will actually last and go the distance. And if you test them under some sort of bottleneck scenario where you don't look at those edge cases that Tim talked about, then you don't have all the information. You can't make an informed buying decision, and you may not buy your GTX 1080 type product. So that's what it's all about. All right. I've started sweating like crazy. I don't know why. Let me try and read this next question, Tim. All right. Jesus, I am really starting to sweat. Has there been any update to AMD contracts prohibiting DLSS? Oh, I think I found out why I'm sweating. genuinely want to know if AMD will do the right thing and allow both technologies to be used. I might actually have to go to the toilet and step out for a bit while you answer this, Tim. So.
Well, the dislike button is just getting smashed at the moment like those other videos. But no update. So if you're wondering...
I'm letting Tim go, by the way. So before you hit the dislike button, just Tim won't be here next month.
This is my last Q&A.
I'll AI generate someone else here.
Oh, that would be so funny if you could do that. So no update. So obviously we put a whole bunch of questions to AMD for the previous video, giving them like a week, or even by that replying video, I think it was like a week and a half. No comment from them. No comment at this point. So they're clearly just not really interested in answering that question, which again doesn't really change any of our thoughts that we've said in those videos. As to whether AMD will do the right thing, obviously there's been a lot of pushback and annoyance at this fact, and I imagine that will start up again, and this will become another hot topic if a game like Starfield launches without DLSS. I imagine that this will come back to light a second time, because at the moment, there is some speculation about it, and even the video I made was it wasn't like a confirmed thing. It's like we think this is likely, as opposed to we know for sure. So I think there will be a lot of confirmation at that point of what was going on. So, I think as Gamers Nexus put it in their sort of news video, where they said that AMD has the opportunity to correct course and make it look like they were never going to do anything dodgy by just correcting it later. But we don't know what's going to happen. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. I think that, I think their strategy for FSR is sort of not great, and this sort of blocking of competitive technologies isn't really...
Allegedly.
Well, yes.
The lawyer over there is saying, holding up an allegedly sign.
But I mean, if they were doing that, it doesn't sell their cards. And that was the main sort of thinking for me, is it doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to do it. So I hope that they come to their senses a little bit there and sort of start pushing.
I think it's worth mentioning that Tim didn't blindside them with this video either. Like this, AMD didn't, they shouldn't have been surprised that the video was coming, and they shouldn't have been surprised by Tim's conclusions and the conclusions he drew based on the evidence at hand, because you spoke to AMD at length about this, and by spoke to them at length, I mean you did most of the speaking, and Tim made it very clear to them that this video was coming in the exact fashion that it did come, and that they had every opportunity to give Tim something that would clear the air, or even give some sort of political answer. And they, after many days of deliberation, decided no comment. So...
I basically, like I said in the video, I basically told them, this is how people are interpreting your statements. Did you want to correct this?
We gave them our platform, our voice to help clear the air or sort it out. We do the same thing for Nvidia as well. And they basically didn't. So,
but I mean, those videos sort of have all the opinions that we have about that situation at the moment. It's really going to be sort of seeing what happens in the future, and I imagine that we will cop some criticism if a game like Starfield does launch with DLSS, because people will use that as proof to sort of say, well, they never did that, whereas I'm sort of sitting here saying they might change what they're doing because of the pushback.
Well, that's the DLSS thing.
Exactly.
Tim's made a video about the original DLSS sucking big time. And I think it was the second game you looked at it, and it still sucked big time. And you're like, DLSS is a dead feature. In its current iteration, it sucks. It's unusable. It's garbage. We were basically sold a lie on DLSS. Nvidia was then like, well, that's no good. Went back to the drawing board, completely redesigned how they use DLSS and how it works, and made an entirely new technology with the same name, essentially, called it DLSS 2, and it was actually good. And then people were like, oh my God, Tim, you're such an AMD fanboy. You said DLSS was dead. And you're like, well, yeah, in my opinion, you had a pretty big part in killing off the original direction that DLSS was taking when it was bad, and pushed Nvidia to do a better version.
Well, I hope so. That's why you make those sort of videos.
And then the same intentions, but this time aimed at AMD with the whole upscaling thing. And really, I joke at the start about, the pushback and stuff from certain viewers or fans of certain companies, and realistically I make the joke because I actually don't care at all. I completely agree with Tim's take on it. I previewed Tim's video before it went live and I reviewed it. I was part of some of the discussions. I knew what went on behind the scenes. So I totally stand behind Tim's work and his conclusions because they were sort of both our conclusions. And I find sort of, and I'm sure there'll be people that get upset by this and leave nasty comments or are outraged or, whatever. But to me, it all just seems really entitled, and it just comes from a silly place where why are you personally upset by Tim's opinion on the corporation? Like when Tim's very much, regardless of whether you agree with him or not, you are taking the position of the consumer. It's not.
Yeah, but I mean, like some of the arguments people were making was sort of saying that what AMD is doing, potentially, again, we're not 100% sure, but that what AMD is likely doing is in some way actually good for the consumer. I found those arguments very odd, which is why we made the replying comment.
Like that's some serious mental gymnastics to defend a corporation that you're making there, so probably don't do that. And again, NVIDIA's done plenty of bad things as well. It's not they've done bad things, so AMD can do a bad thing type argument. That's also equally silly and childish, shouldn't be made. And again, we've gone after NVIDIA for things like the GPP. We've gone after them for changing memory configurations and even core configurations on GPUs. We've gone after NVIDIA plenty of times, which NVIDIA haven't been rapped about either. But really, the only people that should be upset about this probably work for AMD or NVIDIA. So maybe that's who we're hearing from in the comments as disgruntled employees. But really, Tim's video only serves to ensure that future games do have both upscaling methods. I guess that's where I sort of where I come at it from the entitled perspective and just think it's all a bit silly and childish. And first of all, in my opinion, free content on YouTube, whether you agree with it or not, you don't, I get to explain the entitled part, you don't have a position where you can be that outraged by someone else's opinion and that upset about it. It's especially when the worst thing that could happen from Tim's opinion is that the future games do support both technologies.
Pretty much.
So I just, it's a weird way to go about it. But we do see a lot of this with this cult-like attitude that people take towards these companies. We don't care about AMD. We don't care about NVIDIA. We don't care about Intel. We're interested in the products they make. And we look at those products individually, not this is an AMD product, so therefore we have a different opinion about it. And again, AMD doing things like removing chipset support, platform support on AM4, that's bad. We made a video about that, and so many people were attacking us saying it's not technically possible. They can't, technically they can't do it because, Gamers Nexus made a video pointing this out. You guys are so stupid. And we're like, no, they promised it. They can do it. And within days,
they did it.
They did it. Amazing. So anyway, probably enough about that.
So yeah, I mean, that's some of the videos that we make. It's not just even with any review conclusion, it comes from the same perspective. Criticizing the 4060 Ti 8GB is not just to say that you, the viewer, shouldn't buy that product.
Or you should buy a Radeon GPU, because that's not it either.
But it's about setting a standard that that's not an acceptable product to launch so that companies get the message and improve it for the next generation. That's what negative coverage is typically about.
Yeah.
About awareness and about improving it for the future. And things like, with this FSR DLSS situation in games, that's what it's about. So I would be over the moon if they change course and start a nice trend of games that include all sorts of support. That is absolutely what they should be doing. Mm-hmm. I don't think it necessarily refutes the current position, because the current position is the current position. It can change. That's what we hope to see in the industry, is change and not just continuing down the same path for a long period of time. So I think AMD they're certainly aware of the videos. They've gotten the message. It's whether or not they decide to change their strategy. And as we've talked about in previous Q&A questions, their marketing and general strategy for the Radeon team is very bizarre. There are a lot of what I would class as missteps and mistakes in the way that they're going about it. I think that their sponsorship programs are a misstep in the way that they've been handling them, and they're causing a lot of negative feedback around what should be a big moment for them. Sponsoring a game like Starfield is a big deal, should be a big deal, but if it's clouded by other things, then that is bad. And there are ways that they can they can get around that. If this launch for them goes well and the game runs well, not just on AMD hardware, but all hardware, if it has all the features that it should be in the game, I think that will go a long way to
they could
alleviating some of this.
And if that was going to happen, they could bury the story in 2 seconds by saying, no, Starfield, they're welcome to include DLSS. We'll leave it with the developer to talk to NVIDIA. And that's it.
I mean, that goes to their poor PR strategy. And that was really, when I made that original video, it did start as sort of less talking about the evidence that we see for what they're potentially doing, but more about it doesn't really matter whether they are or aren't doing what we're sort of saying. It's more that their whole PR strategy around it has been very bad. So even if they aren't doing it, like what are they, like where they are or aren't doing it, they've just handled it really badly. And, you know, how long did our previous question go for? Like 20 minutes talking about their sort of Radeon blunders and things. And certainly the way that they've handled that situation goes straight into that pile because they did not handle it well. So hopefully they've learnt lessons. That's the point of that content. People got a bit angry about that video, and I don't really mind too much one way or the other. So yeah, we'll continue to put some fiery questions towards some companies as we always do. Yeah,
I mean, you either appreciate the fact that we give you guys honest reviews and we don't care about relationships or support or whatever it is. We're not in the least bit afraid of NVIDIA, AMD or Intel. We are happy to stick it to them if they deserve it. We have no hesitation whatsoever. And with that comes opinion pieces like Tim's, where we stick it to them when we think they're doing the wrong thing. You can't have it both ways. We either are completely unbiased and independent and will go after them with full force when we think that it's necessary, or we'll be worried about, oh, Tim, I need all those graphics cards. We want those review samples, so don't say anything negative about DLSS or whatever. We want to make sure that we get sampled and all that sort of stuff, which, that can happen, but we don't do that. So if you like I said, you gotta put up with it. It doesn't go both ways. We can't just call it all nice for your company, and if you're an AMD fan or an Nvidia fan, and I guess that's why we do rile up the fanboys, as you put it, on certain Reddit threads and stuff, because 1 minute we're AMD shills and the next minute we're Nvidia shills, and you can basically visit r/AMD and r/Nvidia for the same content piece and see both camps calling us shills for the opposition. So that's very funny. But that happens a lot. But that doesn't just happen to us, of course.
Yeah, and I think with these sort of videos as well, you get some comments about like, oh, why haven't you covered X, Y, and Z rumor, right? Like, why haven't you looked into that problem? Why haven't you looked into this? And, why
are you picking on AMD?
Yeah, it's like, we do look into a lot of things, and there are a lot of different issues going on in the market, all sorts of dodgy things happening with various different companies. But there are some things where there's just not enough to make a video on. We can ask people and really not get anywhere or just because we're not reporting on something doesn't really mean that we're not looking into it. Like, there's certainly lots of topics where, we've tried to look into it and it just unfortunately hasn't really gone anywhere.
That's another weak argument that doesn't have a leg to stand on. You can't criticize Tim for going after this, potential blocking of DLSS, but then also have Tim being one of the first YouTubers to tackle the GPP story from Hardware CP back in the day. Like, we were one of the first on YouTube to report on what was a very hot and sort of legal ramifications based on that story as well. Like, it was a pretty sketchy thing. We were a much smaller channel at the time. We jumped straight on that because we believed the evidence was there. We spoke to our own sources in the industry. We believed the Hard OCP report to be accurate. So we reported on it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when it comes to dodgy stuff in the future, like, we're always looking into these things. There's not one story where we sort of sit on and we're like, no, that doesn't sound compelling enough for us to look into.
Yeah. But or that had hurt NVIDIA and our relationship with NVIDIA, so we're not going to do that.
Yeah, no, it's just funny. That, with the thing like the AMD situation, I wasn't comfortable enough to say that what was happening is definitely happening. There was certainly at least some publicly available evidence where you can sort of look at and go, there's some questionable things happening. There's probably enough to sort of talk about. But then there are some issues where there is like one person's word. And it's like, what do you go off on that?
You had some evidence. You had some questions. You put them to AMD. You told them what the implications would be if they couldn't clear up those questions and they opted not to.
Yeah. So
you reported on that and you told people that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and it's difficult because some companies will come back with, we don't respond to questions about rumors. And it's like, well, what...
It's not a rumor, though. You're like, here's my evidence. Can you help make sense of this?
Yes, exactly. It wasn't a rumor. And I think that's where... But again, I don't know how much more to talk about this because, there's certainly lots of investigations that we do. And we take those sorts of things pretty seriously when it comes to reporting on those things. We want to make sure that what we're saying holds up.
If we've made a video on it, you can rest assured that we've had a lot of behind-the-scenes phone calls and meetings and stuff about it. We haven't just been like, oh, here's a hot topic of the day, turn the camera on, make a video, and give our random opinion on it. And a lot of people tried to imply that that's what Tim had done. Assure you that is not what Tim did. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, Tim, could resizable bar and or DirectStorage give 8GB GPUs any relief? So we do see this question a fair bit. And I have seen game developers answer this question, and the answer from them was no.
I mean, we've seen resizable bar right now.
We know how that works.
We know how that works, and it's pretty clear that is not going to be a solution to VRAM capacity issues. With DirectStorage, obviously, there's fewer titles at the moment that take advantage of that, so it's harder to draw a definite conclusion. But just by the way it works, it's very unlikely it would have any impact. DirectStorage is all about loading directly off your SSD, so how quickly games can load in assets to minimize things like loading screens, which obviously you want to take a loading screen that takes 10 seconds down to 1 second. That's a huge improvement. You can potentially eliminate loading screens altogether by technology like that. But we're talking about 10 seconds versus 1 second. With VRAM, you're talking about millisecond levels of loading.
Yep.
And
huge amounts of data.
On top of that, there's always the issue as to why low capacity of VRAM has such an impact on games is that all those assets are being stored with a high bandwidth to the GPU. So VRAM has a very high bandwidth towards the GPU. So as assets are being used, they need that high bandwidth. And the reason that they slow down and stutter so much when the VRAM capacity gets exceeded is they're starting to have to hit up system memory or storage, which comes at a much lower bandwidth.
And higher latency.
So if DirectStorage is loading not from GPU VRAM, but from a much slower storage device with lower bandwidth, it's not really going to solve the issues with VRAM capacity. You're going to have, yes, it's going to give you access to those assets in a more efficient, faster manner. A lot of that is due to, decompression. A lot of games are very inefficient with the way they decompress assets from storage. They're very single-threaded. DirectStorage improves that by doing a lot of the work on the GPU, so assets can be decompressed a lot more quickly, which then improves loading times. But it doesn't allow those, texture assets stored in VRAM to be accessed at the same speed from storage. It's just physically not possible for that to happen. The storage interface is nowhere near as fast as the GDDR6 interface, which is, again, why we have tiered storage. Because if DirectStorage was the solution, you would just plug your M.2 drive in and you wouldn't bother with any VRAM at all. You would just have 2 terabytes of super fast access, but unfortunately that's not the way it works.
Yeah, the problem with the 4060 series is that with the 128-bit wide memory bus and the 17 gigabits per second memory, you're ending up with memory bandwidth of around 280 gigabytes per second, which is slow by GPU to local memory standards. And how fast, is your storage?
10 gigabytes per second would be
PCIe
one of the
5.0
fastest SSDs of all time.
Yeah, so it's technically not possible when you think about it like that. And high-end GPUs, you're looking at well over 500 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, and we've had HBM that does over a terabyte. So.
And that's what they need for things like loading textures and loading assets. If you're needing to access that memory every single frame, access that data, then you can't be, you can't be using the latency and storage, the bandwidth, of storage devices.
So short answer, no.
That's right.
All right, Tim, why can't Intel offer something similar to AMD 3D products, so 3D V-Cache? What are the technical difficulties that prevent them from doing that even in 2 to 3 years in the future?
I don't think there's any limitations 2 to 3 years into the future. I think probably one of the primary reasons why we don't see it at the moment is that by the time AMD's got this technology out, Intel CPUs for those generations have already been locked in quite a few years ago, so they can't just suddenly spin up a Vcache version of like a 13900K. The CPU itself needs to have the, whatever they're called, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's tiny micro pinouts effectively on the CPU die to have the Vcache die attached to it. So if those aren't present, they can't just suddenly start sticking cache on the top. It doesn't work. It actually needs those.
The modular system needs to be in place, is what you're saying.
It needs the connections on both ends. I mean, obviously that's how it would work. So that's why they can't just stick it in. I mean, for future generations, theoretically, they could produce that sort of product. It's a matter of whether they think it's necessary.
Yeah. It's not clear that it would be viable because... we see, obviously we get some insight into it because you could compare the Core i5 would give you a more extreme example to the Core i9. You could lock the frequency of we've done this before. I've done cache versus cores, and we've seen that for the Intel processors, you get more of a performance uplift from the cache, but you do see sort of diminishing returns. There's less of a jump from the i7 to the i9. Something I haven't looked at for a while, but yeah, it does vary on the games. That's true of 3D Vcache as well, right? But I think the jump for having a big fat L3 cache for the Intel CPUs would be a lot less significant than what we see with AMD. But I'm speculating, we don't know because we haven't got it. But I think it would be of less of a benefit on the Intel side because Intel seems to be very efficient with their use of the various caches.
Yeah. So we'll see whether they do that in the future. It's probably a future architecture sort of thing if they do start experimenting with it, but they'll have the information internally. I'm sure they're evaluating it right now, considering the uplifts that AMD has seen, because they're not just going to sit around being like, we're never going to explore that if their competitor is getting 10, 15% performance uplifts from doing that. They're definitely going to be looking into it. But there's always that lag as, some competitors introduce features and others take a few years to get up to that same sort of level. That's pretty much what we see with these things all the time. So
3D iCache in the future.
iCache. Well, they got rid of the I.
Yeah, maybe that's why they wanted to get rid of it for that so they could make I.
We'll see.
All right. Done. Finished for the month.
Yep.
That was a lot of fun, actually. I enjoyed that. We had some long conversations at points there. Hopefully that didn't trigger the people that tends to trigger. See what happens there. But no, it was really good. It was enjoyable. A lot of good questions I felt this month. It probably helped that we had a few interesting things happen throughout the month, which always helps with the whole question asking thing.
Yeah.
But very good. Hopefully next month we'll have something interesting happen. Don't know. And then we got some interesting games coming up after that, don't we? So
yes.
I reckon there's some good Q&As to round out the year. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching. If you would like to support the channel more directly and get some cool things in return, we do have Floatplane and Patreon. Signing up to either one of those will get you access to exclusive live streams where Tim and I get together like we are now, but we answer your questions live. We also do behind the scenes content, Q&A stuff sort of like this, and we have a Discord server. Also, we are working on merch, like publicly available merch. So if you go to hardwareunboxed.com, you'll find our store. So we probably should start linking that soon, and you can buy some of the merch. But it's been a work in progress.
Yeah, I think it's like a test stage at the moment.
Well, we're
shipping
a bit
to only
beyond
certain countries.
Yeah. I think it's mostly US based at the moment, but we're working on getting it global. But there's some cool options there. There'll be more details on the website. So if you're interested, check that. I know a lot of you have been asking for merch for years now, and it's been something we've been working on in the background, but it's a lot harder and more time consuming than you would think it is. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.